What's up, Mets fans? It's your boy CP, and welcome back to the True Mets Talk Day After Recap. The Mets have officially won their fourth consecutive series, securing Game 3 in Chicago by a score of 5-2, but they find themselves in a very sticky situation, potentially losing Edwin Diaz for the next 10 games. Let's talk about it.
You are now watching the True Mets Talk podcast, talking New York Mets baseball 24/7, 365 with your host, CP.
With the shallow right field, stumbling start for Stewart. Dribbles to deep left field by Alvarez, and that's going to go in 4 straight games for the second time in he's homered in 4.
All right, first things first, before we get into it, make sure you hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're new here as you're watching this episode, bottom right-hand corner. Hover over that orange icon and hit subscribe. Turn on those notifications to get notified when new content drops on this channel. And I just want to thank you all, each and every one of you that come back to this channel and are subscribed, for helping me pass 800 subscribers. Road to 1,000 on the channel still commencing, but little by little, all of these milestones along the way. I thoroughly appreciate the support. Let's talk about this game. We'll get into Edwin Diaz, obviously, with the bulk of this podcast naturally surrounding Edwin Diaz, and we'll talk about it more on tonight's roundtable, airing at 9:30 p.m. Make sure you come and check out the best hour on YouTube in terms of Mets baseball. We'll be going live and talking a whole lot more Mets this series, Edwin Diaz, the upcoming series, and a whole bunch more. But the Mets are victorious 5-2. You have to talk about the performance first off from Luis Severino. He absolutely dealt last night. 6 innings pitched, 3 hits, 0 earned runs, 10 strikeouts, and 0 walks. Had his command across all of his arsenal. Fastball, changeup, any other off speed he was throwing, he was able to throw it where he wanted to. Every single quadrant of the strike zone was working, whether it's the low changeup to induce some ground balls, whether it's the high fastballs to strike out a guy like Cody Bellinger, and a hell of an at-bat in a crucial situation. Luis Severino got his start pushed up. The Mets front office was very adamant about taking this series against the Chicago Cubs team that are in direct competition for this NL wildcard race with the Mets. And they relied on Luis Severino, who's been the captain, the anchor, the most consistent pitcher, and the best pitcher of this Mets rotation, with Kodai Senga being out. You got to tip your cap to Luis Severino. I said it on last night's postgame. I expected a lot of Luis Severino coming into this game. I didn't expect 6 scoreless innings, but that's exactly what he provided. And I love the energy that he brought, especially after getting that final out, letting out a roar that I could hear through my TV screen. I love that energy. Shout out to Luis Severino. Offense got it done as well. 5 runs on the board. Was wondering how they were going to bounce back after only putting up 1 run in game 2. Back-to-back home runs by Francisco Lindor and Brandon Nimmo got the Mets started. Mark Vientos with a huge behemoth insurance run with a home run to dead center, clocking in at 451 feet. That was a no-doubter. And the Mets go on to win the ballgame. But this is where, obviously, every Mets fan, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, is talking about right now, and the MLB community in general. Because yet again, we have another instance of a Mets player, not only a player in general, but a Mets player being suspended due to the new age foreign substance rule for pitchers. So let's talk about that real quick. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is not really to go into whether I think Edwin Diaz is guilty of using a foreign substance or whether it's just sweat, rosin, and dirt like Diaz claimed in the postgame. I've come to grips with the fact that none of us, not even the umpires, are going to know exactly what substances are being used when they conduct those checks. Because it's very clear that there's a huge gray area of this rule, not only in terms of the actual substance and what's allowed, but also how much of it's allowed. Carlos Mendoza also saying on the post game that the umpire thought that Edwin Diaz had too much of it on his hands. Too much of what? How much is too much? How much is too little? And clearly, we'll never know for sure from the umpires. There's no test kit to say, oh, it's this substance versus rosin. We simply don't know. And yes, I'd be lying to you if it didn't look like Edwin Diaz looks a little guilty with the cut-in angle that we saw from the ESPN broadcast zooming in on Edwin Diaz's hand. But for all we know, it could have been just dirt and rosin. And the fact that the umpires, Vic Carapazzo, goes in the postgame in the report and states that they have conducted these checks and he has conducted these checks himself 1,000+ different times, and now he's able to differentiate what's just sweat and rosin versus what isn't. I'm sorry, to me, maybe this is just because I'm a Mets fan. That is not a sufficient explanation for me at all. Especially when you're handing out what's on the line is a 10-game suspension to a star closer on a baseball team that has turned it around since said closer came back from the IL and has completely turned it around. It's infuriating. And I've just come to grips with the fact that if MLB doesn't change the wording of the rule, if they don't implement specific markers and checkpoints that the umpires have to follow, if something like this arises, then the players are quite simply, there's no other better term to use, they're just out of luck. Because it's the umpire's word versus the player's word. And we've seen it almost every single time. On a player's appeal, they will not succeed. So it's better, as soon as you get ejected, don't appeal and just start your 10-game suspension. And that's fully what I'm expecting here with Edwin Diaz. There's really no winning in this outcome. But anyways, we're going to continue to see this. We're going to continue to see the confusion and the frustration, not only for Mets fans who have, this is not the first rodeo for Mets fans. Max Scherzer last year, Edwin Diaz this year. You saw an Astros pitcher get a 10-game suspension earlier on here in 2024. But then you see other instances of Yankees players, a Twins pitcher, able to wash their hands before they come back out on the mound after the umpire points something out that they don't like. What kind of discretion are they using for that decision? Anyways, I digress. Like I said, I've come to grips with the fact that we will just simply never know. As Kanye says, I guess we'll never know. But I'm more here for the fact that what do the Mets do in this corresponding move to sort of shore up this bullpen now that we know Edwin Diaz won't be here for the next 10-game stretch? And on the next slide, I'll have the next 10 games that the Mets will be playing in their opponents in Edwin Diaz's absence. But obviously, you cannot replace that roster spot with this sort of suspension. The Mets are going to have to play with 25 guys, and they won't get the 26th. But there is a couple of moves that you can make to bring that bullpen arm up. Now, if you're asking me and what my decision is in terms of the most likely option to shore up this bullpen in the midst of Edwin Diaz's absence, it's bringing Jose Butto back up. There was already prior discussions of Christian Scott coming back up potentially. I brought it up, just an idea on the postgame of Christian Scott potentially being utilized in the bullpen role if the Mets are still trying to figure out his innings limit. But I think the most comfortable for me, right, would be just to utilize Jose Butto and bring him back up. Big Jose Butto fan, if you're new to the podcast, by the way. But how do you get there? We saw Drew Smith last night as well, was the pitcher right behind Edwin Diaz, had to rush his warm-ups, got 2 outs, and then got taken out of the ball game as well. Still don't believe, as I'm recording this at 2:25 p.m., the day after that we have an update on Drew Smith because everyone's focused on Edwin Diaz and what the situation with that is. So Drew Smith to the IL, if it's serious enough, whether it's a blister or whether it's something else, right? You can't phantom IL somebody, although that's a whole other gray area within itself. Ask Billy Epler. You could potentially IL Drew Smith and create a roster spot for that bullpen arm to come up. Starling Marte got taken out in the second game with knee soreness. He was undergoing further tests. Still don't have an update on him, whether he's going to hit the IL. That would be a free open roster spot. Presumably for a bullpen guy. Because before this Edwin Diaz debacle, we were talking about replacing Starling Marte with a guy like Trace Thompson or Ben Gamel as another outfield option. But now the Mets might have to just play with a bench player short in order to shore up this bullpen over the next 10 games. Is DJ Stewart an optionable candidate? He has an option available. Are they going to send him down? Obviously, notching in 2 hits last night as well. But he hasn't been performing up to the level expectations of someone who's going to be on this roster consistently, even given that he has an option available. So he's definitely also an option candidate to be sent back down to AAA. And listen, Tylor Megill is as well. He has 1 option remaining this season on his contract. That is something the Mets can pursue. Now, Tylor Megill's next scheduled start is on Saturday, I believe, versus the Astros. The Mets can wait to make a decision on Tylor Megill, whether they move him to the bullpen and he's the bullpen guy to fill in for Edwin Diaz, or whether he's being sent down for somebody else, I would think would have to come after his next start, his next go-round in the rotation. So we'll see what the Mets do between now and Saturday. I think the most likeliest of option is something's going to happen to Tylor Megill. I think that is the consensus, right? Whether he gets moved from a starting rotation spot after the next go-round to the bullpen, or whether he gets optioned down to AAA to bring up a guy like Jose Butto or a guy like Christian Scott. I think Tylor Megill definitely is the odd man out in terms of moving that needle, whether he's going to be rostered or not. Simply because he has an option left, and also he's just really inconsistent still, which has been his main problem. But this is the next 10 outlook and games that the Mets will not have Edwin Diaz in. I tossed up a poll on the community tab on my channel earlier today. Make sure you go vote. Was asking you all as Mets fans, how confident are we in terms of what the win total for this New York Mets team that is playing tremendous baseball right now is going to be over the next 10 games without Edwin Diaz? Make sure you go vote on that poll in the community tab. Please do me a favor. We'll discuss this down the road, probably after this 10-game stretch without Edwin Diaz is over. But you see here, Subway Series coming up, 2 against the Yankees, 3 against the Houston Astros after that, which is an organization, regardless of what they're doing, the Mets have notoriously struggled against. Then you got Washington for 4 in DC again. And then the first game of that Pittsburgh Pirates series, I believe is only a 3-game set, is the last one that Edwin Diaz will be eligible to miss. Considering, or I should say, assuming that he's not going to appeal this suspension, which I think it would be very wise not to, and just start your 10-game suspension right away. Like I said a couple minutes ago, it is the umpire versus the players, and that almost always doesn't bode well for the player who's appealing that suspension. So what do you all think? With the fresh series coming up, with the Mets playing good baseball, I know this Edwin Diaz discussion has been bogging down this Mets fan base. We're supposed to be talking about a series win, the 4th consecutive series win, but now we're talking about how this team is going to stay afloat without Edwin Diaz, who's been lights out since coming back from the IL. What's the vibe, Mets fans? How are we feeling? I'm feeling confident. 6-4 without Edwin Diaz is certainly plausible. I expect it because it's next man up mentality, or at least it should be. We will tell how this team is composed and what their mental toughness is like by missing their main guy in the bullpen. Can the next man up step up? Can the rest of the guys surrounding that bullpen step up and keep this team afloat? This Mets team, to round things out here, has dealt with a lot of adversity here, and it's not even July. They're 37-39, one game out of a wild card. I am truly proud of this team, all things considered. As always, hit that thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you like what you hear. More Mets talk, regardless of how this team does through this entire season. Mets Roundtable going down tonight, live at 9:30 p.m. See you all there. Hit that thumbs up. Subscribe. I appreciate you all. Let's go Mets. See you all later.
Thank you for watching the True Mets Talk podcast. Make sure you're tapping on that notifications button and checking out all the latest content on the channel. Thank you.